that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wonder hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am George Harvey, and this is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Fennell. Unfortunately, Tom is out because he's having more trouble with his knee. And fortunately, the other problems that he had a couple of weeks ago, he has been healing from. Every day, I get up early and look at the news for energy for the week. And I keep that at my blog, which is geoharvey.wordpress.com. And it's so that it's accessible to people. I put up about 10 to 15 news items every day. And at this time of the week, this being Thursday morning, I have an assembly of perhaps as many as 20 or 22 different items, which I think are the best of the week to talk about. And so this is where the information is coming from. What we start off with is Friday, October 24th. From Business Green, we have this: European leaders agreed to cut carbon emissions by at least 40% by 2030 in a move that could pave the way for a global treaty on tackling climate change next year. The wording means that the target could be raised to 50% in the event of an ambitious emissions reduction deal is agreed on in Paris next year. That is followed by, on the same day, this: Japan warned that a volcano in southern Japan, roughly 64 kilometers, 40 miles from the Sendai nuclear power plant, was showing signs of increased activity and could possibly lead to a small-scale eruption, and warned people to stay away from the summit. They had recently had a distressing situation where there was a minor eruption on one of their volcanoes, and about 50 people who were hiking were killed. The government is trying to get the Sendai plants restarted soon, and this is of particular interest because this particular volcano is only 40 miles from the plant, and of a geologist who is an expert on volcanoes had warned that some of the volcanoes in Japan could conceivably erupt, causing widespread destruction, and that this particular volcano, which is looking like it might erupt, could cause a problem at that Sendai plant, which they have been indicating that they're going to try to start soon. So this is a problem that we will be getting back to in this newscast, because it comes up again. But that is a picture of the plant. Also on the same day, from Princeton University: since Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey, darkening swaths of the nation's most densely populated state for days, a microgrid at Princeton University has emerged as a national example of how to keep the power running for residents, emergency workers, and crucial facilities when the next disaster strikes. This is something I have been talking about and talking with Tom about quite a lot. The idea that every community should have a microgrid similar to the one at Princeton that would allow its electricity to continue to be delivered while the grid is down. And that would also save quite a lot of money. I've mentioned on many occasions that the amount of money Brattleboro spends on electricity is about $24 million a year. That's money that just leaves the economy. And when you consider the size of Brattleboro and $24 million a year, you can see that we can have a much more stable economy by keeping that money in it. If we had our own utility, it would mean jobs, it would mean lower taxes, it would mean energy security, so that when we have another storm like Irene or Sandy, we can keep going. We would have our own power. And that is something that's being done elsewhere in Vermont right now. A microgrid of that type is being put together at Rutland by Green Mountain Power. And a partner of theirs, I think it is NRG. On Saturday, October 25th, from Scientific American, we get this. Rick Piltz passed away. This is the first time we've had an obit on this show. It's in fact the first time I've had an obit, I think, at my blog. Rick Piltz was a prominent whistleblower during the George W. Bush administration, leaking internal documents showing that the administration was actively obscuring climate science. A White House staffer later admitted to editing reports to downplay the effects of climate change, and that admission, by the way, was in front of a congressional committee, and it was made under oath. This is something that I think a lot of people don't really understand. It's not something that has been prominent in the news. It should have been, in my opinion. But to give you an example of the effect of this editing of science, we have a lot of people in the United States even today who will deny that climate change or global warming is even happening. I have a personal friend who has told me that it is an invention of the political left in order to produce a will to have socialism take over the world, which is something that I have to consider kind of bizarre. The effect of this, however, is not anything but, I think, an attempt by certain individuals for profit, quite frankly, to influence people's minds so that they are going to support the idea of maintaining what they call a free market, which is not a free market because it's dominated by people who will adjust science in order to meet their needs. And what that means on a practical level to the ordinary individual becomes clear when you consider, for example, there is a law that says that every 15 years, the United States Department of Agriculture is required to put out an agricultural planting map. You see these things on seed packages so that you can know what planting zone you're in. And the last time that map came out was in the year 2005, at just the time that this thing was happening. And the planting zone map was released by the Agriculture Department, and about 2 weeks later, the White House got the Department of Agriculture to withdraw the map because it clearly showed that climate change, global warming was happening. If you were to take that map, and you can actually go online and take a look do a search and find agricultural planting zone maps. Some of the maps that you can find look like they're a bunch of horizontal red and white stripes. And those maps, in which the red covers about half of the United States in its stripes, those maps show the portions of the United States that have moved from one planting zone into another. It means that the coldest winter temperatures in the United States have increased by about 5 degrees. During the period that lasted from the time that the 1990 planting zone map was prepared, the period of the data, and the similar period for the 2005 planting zone map. And there were a number of universities and colleges and other organizations that produced planting zone maps that were similar to the one that the Agriculture Department had released. But clearly it was an indication, this very powerful indication, that climate change is happening, global warming is happening, and farmers And gardeners should understand that the types of plants that are suitable to the environment that they're in are changing. That being the case, basically what happened was that the White House was in a position where it was trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, and as a result was giving bad information to farmers and to gardeners. Anyway, the man who brought this up, who delivered the information to the New York Times, where it was released, died, and sometime prior to October 25th, it was, I think, about a week before this appeared. That was in Scientific American, that report. The next thing that we've got here is this, from the same day, Saturday, October 25th. Nuclear power generation will account for less than 30% of all electric generation in Japan, according to the newly appointed economic minister. This is the first time a minister has referred to a specific rate for electricity generated at nuclear power plants since the Great East Japan earthquake of March 2011, in which the Fukushima disaster happened. That is a reduction. They're saying that there is a reduction in the amount of electricity that they're going to be getting from nuclear. They're not admitting to a very great reduction yet, but the reduction is thought to be on the order of somewhere between 30 and 60% from what they had. The next item from Clean Technica, the Ford Focus. There's the Ford Focus. The 2015 edition of the Ford Focus is getting a significant price cut of about $6,000, down to $29,995, according to recent reports, thus finally putting it on competitive terms with the market leader, the Nissan Leaf. This actually is the second price cut for the Ford Focus Electric, which debuted at $39,995 4 years ago. So and that, by the way, does not include incentives. As I understand it, you could, if you have enough income that you can stand to get an incentive from your income taxes, you can have a tax reduction of about $7,500. So that is interesting news on that front. Sunday, October 26th, Masao Uchibori, the only party candidate running in Japan's in the Fukushima gubernatorial election, according to the Yomiuri Shimbun, was the winner of that election. There were 6 candidates, all aimed to decommission all remaining nuclear reactors in the prefecture. Uchibori was the only one to back restarting other Japanese nuclear reactors. Now, 3 of the reactors melted down, and one of the reactors, it was in a building that blew up because of a hydrogen explosion. 2 of the reactors at Fukushima Daiichi were not damaged, as far as we know, during that incident, the Fukushima disaster, nuclear disaster. There's also Fukushima Daini, which is the another nuclear plant on the coast also, but which was not damaged significantly, or greatly, I should say, during the earthquake and tsunami that followed. That has 4 reactors, and that means that 10 of the 54 reactors that were in Japan were in Fukushima at those 2 sites. And he wants very much not to have any of those go back online. But of course, the Sendai reactor, they're talking about bringing online early next year. Next, that, by the way, was from the Japan News. Next, from Clean Technica, according to data published by the China Coal Resource. China's coal use has dropped this year by 1.28%. A downward trend started in the second quarter of 2014 and continued in the third. This despite the fact that electricity consumption has actually increased 4% over the year to date. And of course, what is happening is that they're having very large amounts, as we will see in a few minutes, very large amounts of solar and wind power being put in. They are also putting in very aggressively hydro and nuclear and biomass. They're doing everything, but they're having to move away from coal because their air has become quite toxic. And we have heard reports of children as young as 7 coming down with lung cancer of the type that you would normally associate with smoking. That is a very sad thing, but it has arisen out of the fact that they've got a lot of pollution in their air. The next item from Yahoo 7 News, and I believe Yahoo 7 News is a Yahoo organization in Australia. Australian Industry Minister Ian Macfarlane says the government hasn't walked away from a 20% renewable energy target, but a drop in power consumption has required what they call a recalibration. The government wants to adjust the renewable energy target to what they call a real 20%, in effect slashing it from 41,000 gigawatt hours to about 27,000 gigawatt hours per year. That is a cut, as I think anybody with a mathematical mind would see immediately, as approximately 1/3. They have not had a 1/3 cut in energy consumption. What they're trying to do is to find a way to stop increases in renewable power by any means that's possible. And we will talk more about that. Okay, on Monday, October 27th, we got this, which is the risk of severe winters in Europe and Northern Asia has been doubled, including a misspelling. I should put sick behind that, S-I-C in brackets, by global warming, according to a new research. The counterintuitive finding is the result of climate change melting the Arctic ice cap and causing new wind patterns that push freezing air and snow southward. This appeared in The Guardian. You'd think The Guardian would do better with their spelling. You'd think I'd do better with my spelling and get that. And of course the picture there is just somebody walking by a graveyard, presumably in Europe, in the winter, with the sun going, dogs running. Just something to put some color up on the screen. Next, from Energy Matters, solar giant Sun Edison had made several announcements last week in relation to major energy projects in California as it completes major phases of project development. To date, the company has completed 382 projects in California in total, adding more than 489 megawatts of solar capacity in the state. And Sun Edison has been involved in a lot of other projects all over the place. But we're seeing a lot of installation in California, obviously. We are brought up by that to Tuesday, October 28th. The states of New York, Connecticut, and Vermont, and the Prairie Island Indian community in Minnesota filed separate appeals to challenge the Nuclear Regulatory Commission review on nuclear storage. They contend that federal officials did not conduct a thorough analysis of the long-term risks of dry cask storage. And honestly, this is from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Honestly, I would have to say that I can understand why that lawsuit would be brought, and I will be surprised if other people don't join it, because the nuclear waste in the dry cask storage is going to be in storage containers for 100 years. They're made of concrete. Even high quality concrete can't be trusted to last 1,000,000 years. I'm sorry, 100 years. The material that's inside it, the material that's being stored, is nuclear waste, which is considerably more radioactive and more poisonous than the fuel was that went into the reactor to begin with, or that anything is that's found in nature. That is partly because the waste that's in there includes short-term isotopes, which make it extremely radioactive, but which will disappear within 300 or 400 years to a very large extent. But it's also because of the presence of things like plutonium, which for practical purposes does not exist in nature at all, but exists in that waste in a fairly large quantity. And that waste, I think, represents a problem. We do not have a way to deal with it. The federal government promised that it would find a way to deal with it 50 years ago, and it's still promising to find a way to deal with it. Now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has said we don't need to find a way to deal with it right now. We can continue to run the plants that we've got because we can trust that it will be dealt with in the future. Somebody will come along and invent a way to get rid of the nuclear waste that's in dry cask storage. And the dry cask storage is supposed to be maintained by people who are drawing their pay from accounts that are being set up for the purpose. But it does not take a very thorough study of history to realize that bank accounts that are set up for the purpose of maintaining wealth over a period of 100 years are very likely to fail. I remember when I was in college, possibly when I was in high school, there was an article about the DuPont family. They had put together in the 19th century a trust that was it was over $10 million when it was put together. And the idea of the trust was that they wanted no member of the DuPont family ever to be impoverished. The trust was to supply money for anybody who would be in danger of poverty. And when I was in college, or high school, which was probably 80 years after the trust was founded, it was broken up. And the reason why it was broken up was because it was in a poor enough condition. It had reduced in value to the point that the cost of maintaining the trust was very close to the value of the trust itself. So it was going to disappear into oblivion within 2 years or so if it wasn't broken up. And so they did. They broke it up and they gave the money in the trust to I think it was 1,700 people who were in the DuPont family at that time. And the amount of money that they gave was less than $2,000 to each. Now, the point that I'm making is, if you're going to set up a trust to maintain a set of poisonous materials that are going to last for several thousand years, a period of time of poison that is longer than the pyramids are old, you're probably doing something that is simply a matter of folly. So we have a foolish government, and we have a foolish Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we have a foolish set of utilities that are foolish because they're playing games with the future of human beings. And they're doing it because they want to produce power now. And they don't take the time to address the fact, and it is a fact, that a dollar isn't going to be a dollar in 100 years. We don't know what it's going to be. We do know that the mark, the Deutschmark, which was in 1914 the equivalent of about 25 cents, and in those days would buy, if you did an exchange to American money, it would buy eight U.S. postage stamps for first-class mail. By 1922, the German federal government was printing postage stamps that were denominated at 100 million marks because of inflation. Again, another indication that you cannot simply store money with the idea that it's going to buy protection for nuclear waste. What you have to do is deal with the nuclear waste, and we have not found a way to do that yet, at least not a way that is acceptable. We've had discussions of ways to deal with that on this show in the past, and anybody who wants to can go to BCTV's BrattleboroTV.org and look up the Energy Week episodes that had Stephen Rucroft in them, and find out about energy amplifiers. And I believe if you just do a search at BCTV on the energy amplifier, you will find that. But you can find out about the technology. The technology has been there for 25 years. It was invented by a Nobel Prize winning physicist, and nobody's willing to implement it. Maybe they will at some point. I don't know. Maybe we will put the waste into storage at Yucca Mountain. I hope not, because I don't think that's sufficiently safe. Anyway, back to the news. We have a lawsuit going on because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is reviewing has finished their review of nuclear storage and decided that dry casks are sufficient. An implication of this is that they can continue to allow licenses to be given for nuclear power plants. And if they cannot find a way to deal with nuclear waste, then under court order they cannot continue to license nuclear power plants. They started issuing new licenses, renewals for power plants in the last week. So that is the reason why that is particularly important. The next item comes from Renew Economy. New data highlights the catastrophe of the Australian coalition government campaign against renewable energy. In a period when possibly 1,000 megawatts of solar projects would have been commissioned, just 10 megawatts of solar projects have been commissioned in 2014, almost 1/3 of them on IKEA rooftops. Now, it is very important when you consider this particular piece of news to recognize that what they're talking about is grid-tied large projects. They are not talking about grid-tied or grid standalone off-grid solar projects that people were putting on their roofs. We will get back to that as well. There's interesting information about that. But the Australian government has been putting huge amounts of effort, in money as a matter of fact, into pushing coal. They want coal to provide the energy, and the reason is because the heads of the coalition government that is running Australia cannot stand the idea that the coal that they have in the ground, which is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars, would be stranded by an economy that is moving to energy production for using fuels other than coal, or no fuel at all aside from wind and sun and rain. So they have been actively trying to suppress renewable power, and they have been pushing coal. They have been saying we can't afford to give renewable power subsidies or other incentives, and they have been pushing incentives for coal. So they're very vested in the coal energy, and this is the result. They're getting about 1% of the utility scale projects going, and those mostly because of worldwide, not mostly, but largely because of worldwide policy by IKEA. Well, we're going to get back to that. The next item from Asahi Shimbun is this: a town in southwest Japan became the first to approve the restart of a nuclear power station on October 28th one step in Japan's fraught process, it's an interesting term, fraught process, of reviving an industry left idled by the Fukushima nuclear crisis of 2011. Nuclear crisis, I would call it a nuclear disaster. Satsuma Sendai, a town of 100,000, has long relied on the Sendai nuclear power plant for government subsidies and jobs. That will tell you something about why they wanted this nuclear power plant to be reopened. This is the same nuclear power plant which a few days before the vote had been warned about by a geologist, and then a few days later, still a few days before the vote, a separate body of geologists had warned that the specific volcanoes that the first geologist had warned about were in fact getting ready to erupt with a small eruption. The first volcanologist had said, you cannot predict when a volcano will erupt. It just can't be done. You can predict the likelihood that a volcano will erupt in some period of time in the future, but you cannot predict that it will not erupt. And you cannot predict that an eruption will be small. Nevertheless, the people in the town, 40 miles from the volcano, decided that it was okay to have the nuclear power plant going because it provided them with income. And they wanted that income. Again, it's a matter of gambling. The next item is from Alivo, and this is kind of perplexing. I don't know, I shouldn't say it's perplexing. It's a little bit confusing because I don't know what the power source is here. I don't know what their technology is. It's a big company. A new Alivo factory in Concord, North Carolina will produce shipping containers loaded with Alivo batteries to provide 2 megawatts of power, 1 megawatt hour of energy to be attached to grids at strategic locations. These units will also provide a range of services to deliver efficiencies and eliminate waste. Now, I think first of all I should address the question of what a megawatt is and what a megawatt hour is for people who might be a little bit confused about that. If you have a toaster, or if you have an electric iron, it would be a more apt appliance to use because it really could be a kilowatt. An electric iron could draw a kilowatt of power. Power. It draws 1,000 watts. It's the equivalent of 10 old 100-watt incandescent light bulbs. It's the equivalent, perhaps, of 50 or 60 or 70 light bulbs based on LEDs. That iron will draw 1 kilowatt. But you're not billed for a kilowatt. You don't get a kilowatt on your bill because the kilowatt is instantaneous. It's an amount that you're getting at any given time. It's kind of like your speed when you drive a car. You can drive the car at 30 miles an hour. That doesn't mean you're going to go 30 miles. It doesn't mean that you're going to go any particular distance except the distance to slow the car down to stop it. If you have your iron going for an hour, that's 1 kilowatt hour. If you have it going for 2 hours, that's 2 kilowatt hours. If you have it going for 6 minutes, that's 1/10 of 1 kilowatt hour. That's kind of like the distance that you travel when you're driving your car as opposed to the speed. You can drive a mile. You can run your iron for 6 minutes and use a 1/6 of a kilowatt hour. Now, these batteries are going to be pretty expensive, I would guess. Based on what I've read about batteries recently, I wouldn't be surprised if one of those shipping containers cost $5 million. But nevertheless, by putting them on the grid, you can have them take power when there's too much and deliver power when there's not enough. and that will balance out the grid demand, balance out the load. If you put enough of them in, then a very intermittent source of power will be sufficient with the battery to provide all the electricity you need, and you can run 24/7 on solar or wind or any combination of things. I will get back to that in a few minutes. That came from Renewable Energy Focus. Now, the 28th of October was an interesting day. There was a lot of news that came out that day, and it was truly extraordinary. The first item that I have here comes from the Edmonton Journal. It was in the Edmonton Journal because they had a visitor to their town who was the head official in a German region called Rhein-Hunsrück Kreis, I think it was, Kreis. The article had it wrong. It was Hunsrück as opposed to Hunsrück, and it failed to have the Kreis, which is why I'm trying to rely on my memory to get it here. Nevertheless, he came up with a quote. He showed up at Edmonton and he was talking about renewable power, and he was talking about the renewable power in his district, which is roughly a county-sized district in Germany. The district uses wind, solar, biomass, and hydro in combination to supply 177% of the electricity that it needs. It sells the surplus. Its CO2 emissions have fallen by 64% since 1990, and the effect of this on the economy is that they now have $50 million a year more going through it than they did. They have had growth of jobs, they've had growth of income, they've had changes of various types as a result of that. Almost all of them positive, almost all of them profoundly positive, as a matter of fact. But there were people who said this was not possible. And the quote that he came up with was, quote, "Everything is impossible until it is done," end quote. An interesting point. That was followed by an item in Renew Economy on the same day, which said this: "The results of India's latest power auction are in, and it is bad news for developers of Australian coal projects. Solar PVs came in cheaper for Indian users than the electricity price needed to pay for imported coal from Australia. The low bids on solar were below 9 cents per kilowatt hour. In fact, they were 8.6 cents and 8.7 cents. And 9 cents per kilowatt hour is approximately the cheapest point at which coal can be economically viable for import into India. It is a price below which the coal imports are not economically viable. Now, what this means is that India is going to be moving away from coal imports. China is already reducing the amount of coal that it's using. China has slapped a tax on imported coal, and really, if the Australians are going to sell coal, they've got to sell it in places where there is a significant amount of poverty. The problem is, the places where there is a significant amount of poverty are also places where people are getting wise to the idea of renewable power. So that is an interesting item. Now, the next thing is, and this from whoops, come on guys, let's get it right here. Business Week, this is Bloomberg. And what we're seeing here is an offshore wind farm that is off the coast of China. China is on course this year to build 4 times the total wind power installed in all of Denmark, which is probably the most heavily wind-dependent nation on Earth, as developers push to build turbines ahead of cuts to incentives originally designed to spur the industry. The nation may add as much as 20 gigawatts of wind power in 2014 and maintain that pace next year. Now, I think anybody who's thinking about this and doesn't understand the implications, what that actually means in terms of the infrastructure, a gigawatt of wind is not equal to a gigawatt of solar or a gigawatt of coal or a gigawatt of nuclear. They're different. What you have to do is you have to consider two things here. The first thing is what is called the capacity factor. A nuclear power plant, for example, is going to be delivering in a typical year about 90% of the maximum amount of power that it would theoretically be delivering if it were working full-time all the time. That's going to vary from one year to the next. Nuclear power plants have to shut down every 18 months or 24 months to be refueled, which is a process that takes usually considerably over a month. In the United States, nuclear power has a capacity factor of about 90%, a little bit above that. In the rest of the world, nuclear capacity factor is more like 83, 84%, because they spend more time doing their refueling. The capacity factor for onshore wind is about 35%. For offshore wind, it's about 40%. It varies a lot, and a lot of the difference in capacity factors has to do with the fact that wind turbines are controlled by software, and the blades can be rotated and furled and so forth. And so there's a lot of difference from one situation to another. But what this means is that a wind turbine, a set of wind farms that have a total capacity of about 3 gigawatts is approximately, very roughly equal to a nuclear reactor of 1 gigawatt, because the wind farms have, you could say that they have a capacity factor of 30%. It's actually a little better, as opposed to nuclear, which has a capacity factor of 90%, although worldwide it's a little worse. The other thing is this. You have to worry about delivering the power that people want, but you also have to worry about what happens if there's too much power on the grid. And the result of this is that if there's not enough power, the wholesale price of power goes up. If there's too much, the wholesale price of power goes down. Wind power, if there's too much power on the grid, can be furled by software. It can just shut off in a matter of a minute or two. You can't turn it on simply because you feel like it, because the wind is not always blowing. Nuclear power has the reverse problem. With a nuclear power plant, typically that plant has to run 24 hours a day. It has to produce power 24 hours a day at full load, because it has a boiler that is so big that you cannot simply turn it on or off like a tea kettle. So the nuclear power plant has to run all night producing power in order to be able to produce the baseload power for the peak demand period during the daytime. So if nobody wants that power, they have to figure out how to get people to use it. And that means that the power goes onto the grid at an auction. And the low price for power, if there's too much, can actually go negative. And I've seen a number of reports of negative prices for wholesale power in the last couple of years. They're getting bigger, and the lowest prices I've been seeing are negative 100, are below actually, a negative $100 per megawatt hour, which is the equivalent of paying a person 10 cents for every kilowatt hour of power he uses. If you don't use the power, something is going to burn up. So it's very important that it be used. The result of that is that a gigawatt of nuclear power is not a gigawatt running. It is a gigawatt running full time, but it's not a gigawatt running usefully full time, because a lot of the time that it's running, it's not being useful, which is why the power price goes down. Also, when you are very dependent on large power plants, if a power plant goes down, it means that you need to get the power from somewhere else. And the highest price I've seen for electrical power was in, I'm going to say, I think it was in Western Australia. I might be wrong, but a 700 megawatt coal burning power plant went down unexpectedly and suddenly. And the result was that the price of power went from $63 per megawatt hour to $11,499 per megawatt hour in over a period of about 5 minutes. And then over the next 10 minutes, it settled back to about $2,000 per megawatt hour. And then it slowly settled down from there as more and more power producing plants went online. And fortunately for the people of the area, that happened at about 10:30 at night. So the power outages that they experienced as a result of that were not happening at times that were critical. We will get back to that, I'm sure. That the idea that the Chinese were putting on these plants, and you could think of 20 gigawatts of wind power as being about the equivalent of six or seven medium-sized nuclear power plants going online. And these plants they can be installed very, very rapidly. I saw one which was a power plant off the coast of Wales. It involved, I believe, 2.2 megawatt turbines, 160 of them. And they were installing them at a rate of one a day. So they were going to get 352 megawatts, I think was what it came to, installed over a period of 160 days, in 6 months. If you consider the same activity for a nuclear power plant, it would take years. So these things can be installed if they've got the permissions and all the equipment that's needed lined up. They can be installed very rapidly. The next item, also on the same day, from Channel News Asia, which is just the place that I came across it first. Europe is on track to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 24% in 2020. By 2020 from 20, I should start again. Europe is on track to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 24% by 2020 from 1990 levels. 4 percentage points higher than their goal. They're ahead of schedule on this. In fact, they are substantially ahead of schedule, which is why they could agree to much higher levels that were mentioned earlier in the week for their targets for 2030. I was expecting to see 37%. They agreed to 40%. And this will explain that. The European Environment Agency is the source of this. The bloc is also on its way to meet the target of having renewable resources account for at least 20% of their energy needs by 2020. Now, the reduction of 24% in carbon emissions with a 20% increase in the use of 20% of total being the goal for renewable energy happens because they're instituting efficiency programs. So as the efficiency programs go in, the actual amount of power they're using is declining. And the amount of power that they are using is declining quite rapidly. The amount of power that a German family uses, the amount of power that German industry uses and so forth is rather small compared to the amount of power used in the United States. We could be very much more efficient than we are, but we aren't being more efficient than we are. So, that's kind of a moot point. Anyway, that was all pretty good news from Europe. Today, October 30th, we got this. This is an interesting article. Wind power is cheaper and more reliable than natural gas. There is a lesson to be learned from the debate in Australia and the analysis it produces. Not only is traditional fossil generation intermittent, and dangerously so, but the intermittency of some renewables is simply not a problem. This from Clean Technica. And this is actually just a reiteration of something that we have seen in the United States already. The cost of power from wind plants is lower than the cost of power from natural gas plants. And I'm not talking about natural gas peaking plants, which have very high costs of power. What I'm talking about is baseload natural gas plants. When you compare them to wind plants, the wind plants produce power at a lower cost. Typically, in 2013, wind power was being, the PPAs, the power purchase agreements, big wholesale agreements, the average, according to the US DOE, was 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And that is, even if you take in federal incentives out, which has happened, the wind power is no longer getting federal incentives right now. If you add that to the cost, which is 2.3 cents, you come to 4.8 cents per kilowatt hour for wind power. The cost for natural gas is typically about 7 cents. So wind power is well below the cost of natural gas at the wholesale level. But the interesting thing about this is that because a natural gas plant, if it goes down, is bringing down baseload power and you need to go to backup power, it has the same kind of intermittency at cost to the consumer that wind power has. And really, if you're going to be comparing apples with apples here, the way to do it is not to say wind power is intermittent, natural gas plants are only intermittent in rare circumstances. The way to do it is to say wind power is intermittent, we have to be able to cover that. Natural gas, coal, nuclear are intermittent, we have to be able to cover that as well. How much does it cost to cover wind power so we know what we're getting is power 24/7, as opposed to how much does it cost to cover natural gas, coal, and nuclear? So we know we're getting power 24/7. And it turns out that backing up baseload power plants costs about 3 times as much as backing up wind power. You have to install more capacity in order to get the same amount of power, the energy, out of wind plants, as opposed to baseload power plants. You have to install more capacity. But you knew that all along anyway. So the question is, what are you going to do in order to cover the times when the power goes out? Now, just to take an extreme example of what has happened in the United States with power capacity going out, we could look at the San Onofre nuclear power plant, where both of 2 reactors at the plant were brought down by the same problem at the same time. And the problem was not something that was an accident that happened on that day. It was because the design of their steam generators had been altered in new steam generators. And in order to be able to correct that, they had to replace the steam generators, which would cost well over $1 billion and take months. But there were other problems. And when the other problems, when they went through the problem of how are you going to deal with the steam generators, dealing with the cost of the steam generators, how do you put that cost on the consumers? The steam generators were going to be, were misrepresented to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I believe. They were said to be drop-in replacements, and they really were not. Mitsubishi was claiming they were. The people who owned San Onofre was saying they were not. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission was extremely unhappy about the thing and was not willing to let people just plug in a new steam generator, even if it arrived, which is going to take a long time because it takes a long time to build these things. So the plant was off for a couple of years. Both reactors, which were supplying power to San Diego and Los Angeles. So people in Southern California had to pay a lot of money for power that was coming from the backup, because backup power is expensive. And what they have been doing has been adding wind and solar. And that wind and solar has carried them through. This last summer was the third. It was a very hot summer. Hydropower was down because of the drought. And even so, they didn't have widespread power outages or significantly large power outages because those two nuclear reactors were offline. And as things happen right now, the nuclear reactors are closed down permanently. So this is what happens. This is a kind of thing that can happen when you have a heavy reliance on a type of power which is there as a big chunk of your demand. By contrast, if you had to put in 6 gigawatts of wind power and solar power, 7-8 gigawatts combined, and you got the power from that, and then used some other kind of power to cover the times when you have the need for it, the cost is lower. So the cost of nuclear power is too high. And as a matter of fact, big coal plants and natural gas plants turn out to be more expensive than wind and as expensive nearly as solar. So things are changing in this world. Now, the next item that we have is this. Germany is considering removing some of its coal plant capacity as part of a raft of new policies to help meet greenhouse gas emission goals. Having decided that they're going to shut down all of their nuclear plants and having shut down 8 out of 17, they are now shutting down coal burning plants. On December 3rd, Chancellor Angela Merkel's cabinet is to decide on a program that is likely to include steps to boost energy efficiency and possibly reduce coal generation. This from Your Active. They continue to have an interesting thing going on there. And the final item for today, rooftop solar installations have reached grid parity. This is from Tree Hugger. Rooftop solar systems have reached grid parity, which means it costs the same or less than getting electricity from the power grid in 10 U.S. states. According to the latest report of solar energy analyst at Deutsche Bank in 2016, solar rooftop will reach grid parity in all 50 U.S. states. That is by 2016. By 2016, I would take to mean by January 1st, 2016, which is only about 14 months from now. And that means that it will be cheaper to buy solar panels, put them on your roof, and get your power from those than it will be to buy power from the grid. And it happens that in Vermont, that's already the case. So that's not a big surprise to me, but I'm sure it would be a big surprise to a lot of people. Now, I am at the end of my hour, I see. So I'm going to close this whole thing down. I had intended to show you this graph more closely, and I will put it up there so you can see it. The energy, hopefully I will be here next week and we can have another energy week. I don't have any second program for today, so I will just say goodbye and hope that you're all well. Until then, have a nice week.
We spin and we toil, we work all day, sowing and reaping, we store goods away, so we can be dressed well on the day that we die. We dig and drill and waste what we find, break up the earth, leaving little behind, but we will grow lilies in the by and by. I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still.